guys, here's my QI walkthrough. I did try reverse engineering my QI settlement at the end of the last season, but the video just ended up being way too long and way too complicated. I know that you guys want the step-by-step spreadsheet. I'm going to do my best to make this quick, but the QI has evolved a lot, and so there's a lot of different variables in what you're starting with at the beginning of the city, as well as how you progress throughout the season. And those variables are supply, coin from main city, goods, potentially extra goods at the start from your main city. QI attack is going to be a variable, and then the final variable is just the fucking dumb luck, what you actually get as you progress through various nodes. Okay, so there's a lot of different variables now that were not the case when QI first came out. So the spreadsheet that we all were aware of, at least, or at least somewhat used, I'm going to call it Bob's spreadsheet or Bob's system just for simplicity's sake. That system had some fundamental flaws to begin with, but it's definitely outdated now. Now that we do have these different variables in here. So I'm going to show you the system that I've been using, and it's not so much a this is step number one, this is step number two. It's more phase oriented, like this is progress point number one, and if you do it on your first collection, cool. If you gotta wait till your second collection, that's fine. So it's not necessarily based on collection to collection. It's more of landmarks in the city development, if that makes sense. So ultimately there isn't a one-size-fits-all system for QI anymore, and as much as I would love to give you guys a spreadsheet, I don't think it would be useful or accurate, honestly. So this setup here represents our starting city, right? We've got 12 wide, 16 tall. Town hall starts in the corner. Bob's system has you shift your town hall up by 3, and we're going to plant. I don't have a whole lot of 4x3 stuff in my main city, so I'm actually going to be using Earth's Guardians as butcher representations. Just kind of know that this is always going to be a butcher, and just mentally be aware that there's an extra 3 squares attached to that building. Anyways, Bob's system is spaced 3 vertically, and we're going to set up combinations of butcher, housing, butchers, on the back, and then on the front we're going to have combinations of butcher as well as a pair of houses or a single amphitheater for happiness. Okay, Bob tells us to create 2 expansions at the very beginning. I do agree with Bob. If you are able to get the 3rd expansion at opening, I would recommend doing that as well, but at least get the 2. So let's work off of that. Let me pause it. I'm going to set up the next scenario. All right, next scenario. This is phase 0. From the original QI stuff, let's disregard all the ascended possibilities for right now. Just look at the bare bones, what everyone starts with, and how to actually get your city rolling. Okay, this is phase 0. And on a side note, real quick, I'm using this this mock-up right here to kind of track the permanent progress as we go through different scenarios. We'll be able to track the permanent progress here. Okay, Bob is 3 up from the corner, 7 in front of the town hall at the opening. Bob plants 1, 2 amphitheater, and then 3 amphitheater with a butcher in this right hand corner. That's Bob's system. So phase 0 in my city is the same 1-2 amphitheater that Bob has. On the right side there, I space my town hall up 4 vertically. So my third amphitheater is actually not in this corner, it's in the back in my system. And the reason I'm spacing it 4 vertically instead of 3 at the beginning is because over time, 3 and 7 vertical spacing are not going to be very conducive to the dimensions that we're working with, because we're working with mostly Taylor and house for the developing stages, which would be a combination of 4+2 or 4 in the back. So the 3 and the 7 aren't really dimensions that we can work with as the season goes on. So vertically, I like to just get the town hall in the correct place vertically as soon as possible. Eventually, I will shift my town hall 1 to the right, and that'll be on phase 1. So after the first collection, we'll make that change, and from there, the town hall will never move again. Okay. So the change that we're going to make on phase 1 after the first collection, we're spaced 4 vertically, so we have room for 6 in the front, 4 in the back. Okay. The change that we're going to make after the first collection is to get that third expansion, shift the town hall over by 1, and this will now be a combination of Taylor, and Butcher in the back corner, and from there it will stay in that position for the rest of the season. So part of the reason why I suggest getting this third expansion at the beginning, if you can. If you can't, that's fine. You'll just get it it'll be the second collection for you at that point. Okay, let me reset it. So this is phase 0. So this is opening. Bob and I accomplished the same amount of hardware. I do use 3 extra roads over Bob. 2 extra roads, I think, actually. I think he does have 1 road right here somewhere. I use a couple extra roads, but ultimately my town hall is vertically in the correct position, and these roads will get rearranged in the following step anyways. So that works for me. Not a huge difference though. We both accomplish the same hardware. We have 1, 2, 3 amphitheaters, 4 houses, and then 8 butchers. So from the first collection after phase 0, we'll have 200 available pop, 200 consumed, so 0 available. 400 demand for happiness, 450 provided, so we're good there. We'll get 40,000 coin on the next collection, and then 80,000 supplies. Okay, and me and Bob both accomplished the same thing. Inno changed what you start QI with, so now you have enough supplies to plant a Taylor, theoretically. In this scenario, we don't have enough population to plant the Taylor though. So you'd have to omit probably a second butcher and plant another airship, correct? In order to have the population to actually plant that Taylor. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Here's where the variable comes in though. So we all start with 150k coin and 25k supplies, bare minimum everyone, regardless of whatever you generate from your main city. Before I even build my initial development, I jump straight into the map because all of those early nodes are giving coin and supplies potentially as rewards for each action that you complete. So I like to know how many resources I'm actually starting with before I start building my town hall. The permanent boost in my city currently is around 220k coin, and then 48k supplies. And that's permanent boost. Those are from buildings they're not ascended buildings, they're permanently planted in my building. So I will always be able to start QI with those resources. After hitting a couple nodes in the early phases, where you're potentially getting supplies as a reward, it's basically impossible to not get 50k supplies at least, which would allow me to plant 2 tailors. So that's what my strategy is based off. That's what I've been doing. So let's look at how that gets organized in that scenario. We would remove 2 butchers, which gives us the population that we need to plant 1 of these tailors, correct? The second tailor doesn't really fit in here, and we don't have the population for it either, so we would remove a 3rd butcher. Well, you wouldn't remove it, you just don't plant it to begin with, right? But we do need 1 more tile house to balance the population there. Makes sense? So now we have 500 population provided, or 250 population, 500 demand for happiness. We only have 450 provided happiness. So this is a butcher. So it's 4 wide, but there's a gap for an amphitheater down here. So our happiness is going to be out of whack on the first collection. We will need to delete 1 butcher and plant a 4th amphitheater in order to complete this collection. Okay. So I've got my second tailor planted. From here, I add 2 additional houses. I need 5 bare minimum just to sustain the population that I'm consuming. I'm going to plant 7 and delete 2 at collection, as well as 1 butcher, plant 1 amphitheater, and then complete collection. The nice thing with using tile houses as filler is that you can actually collect down to like happiness 80% and still make a profit on the cost of the tile house. So it costs 2,500 to plant. Even if you're at 80% happiness, you're still collecting 5,000 coin roughly from that. And ideally you're collecting 10,000 from it if your happiness is on point. But as filler, the tile house is actually really not a bad way to go. Like, we could leave that as empty space, delete a butcher, plant the amphitheater, but we might as well get the extra 2,500 coins per repetition, so 5,000 extra coins total, which kind of offsets the cost of planting the amphitheater as well as deleting and replacing the butcher. Makes sense so far? So, collection number 1, we're going to delete the extra 2 tile houses. We have population 0 now. We're at complete parity on population, but don't have the happiness to finish collecting. So collect and delete 1 butcher, plant our 4th amphitheater, so our happiness is on point now. Finish collecting, and from here, delete the 4th amphitheater, and we're going to plant and rush. You don't have to rush it. I choose to, but you don't have to. Plant and rush a goods building. So part of the strategy with the goods building, I pick jewelry, cloth, and iron. They're the smallest of the building types. Part of my strategy with goods order is to use the jewelry production first, because over time the cloth and the iron are interchangeable with a butcher, whereas the jewelry is the same footprint as a tailor, and as your city develops, you probably don't want to be deleting tailors in order to build a goods building, whereas the butcher is deletable and replaceable pretty easily. So we're going to build and rush. You don't have to rush it, I choose to. Rush the goods building though and print expansion number 4. So if you remember early on, we've got 1, 2, 3. Bob says to get 2. I recommend 3. Now that we've rushed that goods building, we'll get expansion number 4 down here. I'm getting, so I have enough temporary stuff currently to start the season with 36, okay, 36 of each good. So I used like limestone or something like that, which is not a building that I'm going to be printing in my city. Like I don't select that goods building at the opening. So I burn up the limestone first on the first expansion, and then use shards for 1 and 2, or 2 and 3, sorry. And the strategy here is to kind of double dip on your goods, because at this stage, when we're planning this goods building for the purpose of printing this expansion, you won't have enough resources to print this expansion if you start with 0 goods. The only way you can do it is if you piggyback off of the 20 or 30 that you start with, plus this repetition. Makes sense? So burn up your limestone on the first expansion. Shards, and then if you don't have the enough ascended shit to print this first expansion with goods, I would still recommend getting all 3 expansions with shards, and then print this 4th expansion from the goods building after your first collection. Let's reset this again real quick, and I'll explain why that's important. So in general, my QI approach is I spend very, very few shards on the settlement itself. I spend most of my shards on actions, and the few shards that I do spend on my main city are for key moments in development, where if you don't rush it or buy the extra expansion, you're going to be potentially like 2 days behind on development. So very few and far between that I rush anything on the settlement. But that is rushing this goods building as well as buying the 3rd expansion are pretty critical, I think. And the new QI system, where yes, you can buy actions with shards, but it resets seasonally instead of daily. That's kind of a turn off on spending shards on actions. And then I assume that we'll still be getting 10 shards here and there from various nodes as you progress through the map. So at that point, it's all the more reason just to divert those shards to the city progress itself, considering that your action or your map progress is going to be pretty heavily restricted. Second advantage here with the rushing is that this goods building is print only as much as you need. We're not going to run 2 cycles or anything like that. Just print exactly enough to get that 4th expansion. And from here, we move into our permanent town hall placement and permanent layout organization. That's why I rushed this goods building, because the entire configuration of the city depends on that 4th expansion. And this is where Bob and I are significantly different. Bob doesn't get this 4th expansion until pretty late in his process. I think it's his final step, actually. So the entire time, Bob is working with a combination of 3 and 7 spacing vertically, and then 4 and 5 horizontally. And the problem is this 5 is absolutely useless for anything except for a pair of House and Taylor, but really not an efficient way to set that up. There's nothing that we want that's 3 tall on the back, and there's nothing that we want that would fit into a combination of 7 besides like 3 farms, but we don't have the resources to plant that, obviously. And then the only thing that would fit into a 4 wide would be Butcher and Amphitheater, which are both buildings that we're trying to get away from. So as Bob's city evolves, he ends up with these 1 by 1 gaps basically around the entire perimeter of his city, where he has there's space for 4 here, and he's saying, oh yeah, upgrade to a Taylor, it's 3 wide, because it's a better building, which it is, but now you have a gap here. I forget the exact amount, but I think by phase 4, Bob has 30 empty squares and 15 grid squares. So he has 4 by 4, but sans the one in the corner. So he has 15 grid squares to work with, 30 empty squares. By phase 4, I have all 16 grid squares, and I only have 6 empty squares. So part of the reason why I'm rushing this goods building is to be able to jump into this permanent layout, where by phase 4, I have virtually no wasted squares, and I'm using a full 4 by 4 grid pretty early on in the development. So here's phase 2, which is after the first collection. This is the change that you make immediately after collection number 1. And on a side note, after setup, so phase 0, before you collect anything, this third expansion would just be another Butcher as filler. So from collection, or from start, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Butchers, 2 Taylors, 5 houses, plus 7 houses total, but 2 of those are deletable, correct? Just to balance happiness. If you do buy the third expansion, which I recommend. So once we print and run that goods building, we can transition immediately into phase 2. So this will be setting up our second collection. We have 1 Butcher in the back, that back corner. Let me move the town hall out of the way just so you can see how the roads are configured. So Butcher, Taylor, Taylor. There's our 2 Taylors from the beginning. 1 Butcher, 2 Butcher, 3, 4, 5, and 6 from the original layout. You should have enough left over from printing the 4th expansion to plant 1 more Taylor, and that's where that would go. We started with 7 houses at setup. We now have 8. 2 of those are deletable. Current population. So population provided would be 8 times 50 is 400. Population provided. 6 Butcher is 150 plus 3 Taylor at 50 pop is 300 total demand for happiness. So we have a surplus of 100 population. Happiness demand is going to be 800. We're only providing 450, so we're upside down there. But we also have 2 houses to delete, so we're minus 350 here. So collect and delete 2 houses brings our happiness demand down to 600, and collect and delete 1 Butcher and we'll break even on happiness there. This process ends up being a pattern throughout all of QI, and it's actually extremely annoying. Plan a Butcher, delete the Butcher, plan an Amphitheater, finish collection. That ends up being a repeating theme throughout the entire process of QI. So this is how I've been doing it. This will work. I'm going to jump forward a couple more steps just so you can see how I've been doing it, and it will work. It grows pretty quickly, but the constant delete rebuild thing is really counterproductive in the grand scheme of things. So let's I want to do a side note on that, but I'll do that in a second. The the main goal here is that we now have a group of 12 wide on the back, which is currently amphitheater, but over time that's going to break down into 4 combinations of either Taylor or double arches, right? And that's the permanent layout that my city uses until the end of the season. So that's what's nice about my system versus Bob's, is that Bob has this 3 and 7 spacing for a while with tons of gaps around the outside of the city. If you have 30 empty gaps, I would actually just plant a shit ton of houses and let your happiness go to complete shit. But as long as you're collecting more coin than it costs to plant at the next collection, collect 1, delete it, happiness goes up. Collect 2, delete 2, happiness goes up even more. So as long as you're making profit on coin, I would rather use those empty squares just to plant houses. The other benefit there is that it's adding to your action count per hour as well, which is going to be especially nice now that they've kind of nerfed that. So let's check our permanent reference here real quick. We just got this 4th expansion, so now we've got 1 Taylor. There's a road in this back corner that connects the butcher and the Taylor in that back corner. We've got another butcher here, which is in its permanent location. We've used the 4th expansion to add another house, and there's a little gap behind the house, not a big deal right now, and then the butcher. That's the substantial changes that we made after the first collection with that extra expansion. These buildings stay where they are permanently. Eventually we will get this expansion as well, which replaces this butcher with a farm and another arch, triumphant arch. And then this pair of house and butcher will eventually become a farm as well. Those are long-term changes, but for now, our town hall is in the correct position. We're using 1, 2, 3, 4 roads on that group of buildings, and they're permanently set up now for the rest of the season. So that's the change that we're making after collection number 1. This is a good time for my side note, actually. Let's look at 2 different strategy ideas. You've got Bob's system is, he stays with the 15 grids that you start with. He stays with those same 15 grids for most of his setup. He doesn't get this 4th expansion until pretty late in the game. Let's look at the flaw in the logic there. Bob's approach is to systematically update tile house to cottage, cottage to villa, and he systematically updates those buildings each cycle, butcher to Taylor, and then Taylor to farm eventually. That's Bob's strategy. But he works with the same 15 grids for most of his setup. The goal here is to replace tile with cottage in order to increase our productivity per square. That's ultimately the goal, right? But there's 2 different ways to look at it, because the problem is definitely productivity per square, but the solution is not necessarily updating the building. That's Bob's approach. My approach is actually just to add more squares. So let's look at the math on that. Tile house costs 2,500, gives 10K on the next collection. Okay, so if we delete that and replace it with a cottage, we've now invested The 6,250 to plant the cottage plus the 2,500 is going to be 8,750 that we've invested in coins, and our next collection is going to be 20K. So yes, it's double the output of the tile house, but we haven't added to the output of the tile house. We deleted the tile house and replaced it with something. So net gain on this scenario is going to be 11,250 in coin after we make this adjustment. Plus it costs 25,000 in supplies. So we've invested 8750 in coin plus 25K supplies in order to generate a net profit of 11,000 coin, right? My strategy is to use these resources to print more expansions and fill those expansions with additional cheap buildings. So instead of deleting and replacing the tile house, I just add a second tile house. So I now have 5,000 coin invested. One tile house, two tile house, right? And my next collection will be 20K in coin collection. So net profit of 15K in coin. Zero supplies invested though. That's the main thing. So it's not only more profitable in coin, there's zero supply invested. So if you rinse and repeat this pattern and focus your resources on expansions and just continue duplicating the cheap buildings, you'll accumulate those resources faster earlier on. Eventually you do hit a wall where the cost of expansions becomes pretty impractical, and then at that point, that's where I start using the resources that I'm getting from collection to maximize the output of individual buildings. But early on, when expansions are cheap, crank them out, plant the butchers and the tile houses just ad nauseum, fill up your whole city with butcher and tile house, and then start chipping away at the big stuff. Same principle down with the supply buildings. The tailor is going to give us double the production of a butcher, but it's also costing 25,000 in supplies. So it costs 25,000 in supplies. It gives 20K at the first collection. So we're at a deficit of 5K supplies just to even plant the upgraded supply building, which is kind of ironic in a way. And yes, over time, you get the return on that investment, but the assumption is that if you're looking for efficiency per tile, then yes, Taylor is better, and Farm is way better, right? But if you're looking at how to accelerate your city from the beginning, this is actually a delay, right? And at the beginning, you don't really have 5,000 supplies to just piss away. Towards the end of the development, when you're collecting 400,000 or 500,000 of each resource every collection, then yeah, plus or minus 5K doesn't really matter. Plant some decorations, waste some troops, whatever. But at the beginning, those 5K is the difference of being able to make an upgrade or not, get the expansion or not, you know? So the long-term strategy with the Taylor is it's more efficient per tile, but at the beginning, it's actually cheaper just to print more expansions and plant additional cheap buildings. Does that make sense? Same concept there. I made the mistake of planting a farm at the beginning of last season just because I had enough ascended resources to do that. I will never do that again. There's a few huge issues with that. First of all, even if you do have the coin to do that, you won't recuperate the coin that you've spent from tile houses until like the second or third collection, when you actually start recuperating the initial coin that you start with. Second problem is that now in my other scenarios here where I'm like, okay, plant 2 extra houses, we don't need the population, but just use them as filler. collect the coin, delete them to balance your happiness. You don't have that freedom once you plant a farm early on, just because half of your population is kind of handcuffed to this building, and you can't delete the population demand out of that, or you shouldn't at least. You can't delete that population demand. So you're handcuffed to the population as well as the footprint of the farm. The second problem there that I ran into was the imbalance of supply and coin. So like I said, you can't recuperate the coin. You're getting a shit ton of supplies. The only thing you can do with those supplies is upgrade your houses to hopefully catch up on coin, but you don't have the real estate to plant the happiness to justify it. So it ended up just being an absolute headache. Beyond that, the only way to actually make that worthwhile is to rush the farm at beginning. And goods buildings, I think, are like 25 or 50 to rush, relatively cheap. Rushing the farm construction, I think, is 100, something like that. And that's the only way that you'll even be able to recapture the supplies that you've invested on the first collection. Because otherwise, you invest 50,000 supplies, it takes 10 hours to build, so you collect nothing from it on the first collection, and then on the second collection, you'll get 66,000 coins, or 66,000 supplies, sorry. So the only way to even make that worthwhile in terms of supplies is if you actually rush it at the beginning. So that whole process just did not appeal to me, and I don't think it's the right way to do it. All right, back to my system. Collection number 2, you'll have to manipulate happiness a little bit. I'm not going to break that down step by step. You have to manipulate happiness a little bit. But at the end of the collection, you will be able to plant your first arch, and don't have quite the happiness to delete the second amphitheater. I do though, and then I manipulate my happiness again on the subsequent collection. You'll have enough resources left over to plant another tailor, which is the big thing, and then some empty space that I just fill with some extra tile houses here, and connect those on a road in the back. Just temporary. It'll fuck up your happiness again. Even with the amphitheater, your happiness is still going to be out of whack, so you'll have to delete these, manipulate a butcher, whatever, rinse and repeat. That's about it for this collection. Second collection after this, though, or second landmark, I should say, because if you're able to do this faster, then you might be able to do it in one collection, is going to be our second arch, which is now enough happiness to delete that third amphitheater and plant our those last 2 tailors in there. And this is going to be mostly the permanent layout that we're working with for the rest of the season. This is enough happiness to break even, assuming tiles and a couple cottages. I upgrade those when I do have a couple extra resources. So there's probably 1 or 2 cottages in here at this point. But happiness is mostly under control at this point. So the collection after this, pay attention to this one. This does need to be done precisely. The collection after this, assuming that you've upgraded at least a couple of these to cottages, we do have a happiness imbalance. So we're going to delete butchers. 2 of them you can. Plant the amphitheater that you need, delete a house if you need to as well, just to regulate your happiness. But here's the change that we're going to make on this landmark. After we collect everything, we're going to finish rearranging our roads into the true permanent location, which is going to look like this. This would be a butcher, right there. This is still potentially a butcher. If you do have enough resources, at some point around this period, you'll plant another tailor as well as a house down here. This will stay a butcher though for quite some time, and I'll explain that as we go. We're going to add another house, and then build our archery camp. I usually rush the archery camp for the same reason that I rushed the goods building up in phase 0. I usually rush the archery camp. You don't have to, but after we build one set of archers, there's a couple other steps in here, so it's nice just having all your collections synchronized for the next round. After you print one set of archers, we're going to move that archer away from the road and then fill the remaining space in here with more tile houses. Okay, so this step is actually pretty important. Early on, ballista versus ballista combinations, you can auto battle with pretty minimal losses. The only issue is with horse combinations, and 8 archers versus horse combinations early on actually works pretty well on auto battle. You will get pretty frequent casualties or injuries though. So the archery camp is more important to me than ballistas early on. And as you get into later stages, it's mostly ballista, legionnaire, archers, whatever. But early on, the 8 ballista that you start with are actually pretty sufficient. The advantage with the archers, they're cheaper to print, first of all. The camp is also cheaper to keep permanently housed in your city in terms of real estate. So we don't really have room for a permanent 4x3 right now. I mean, tailors and butchers obviously, but not like a permanent military camp. But this 2x2 actually fits in this pocket perfectly. The other thing that's happening right now is that we've been pretty systematically upgrading our butchers into tailors. So our supply production right now is at 170k, but our coin production up until this point has been around 90 to 100, depending on how many cottages you have. So there's an imbalance there, and we start the incursion with a surplus of coin, so this is not necessarily a huge problem. But at this point, after 2 arches, plus the upgrades to the tailors that we've made, we're probably running out of coin. So at this point, the extra population is not necessary, and it's going to completely fuck up your happiness, even with the 2 amphitheaters. You should be a 700 or 750 population at this point, which would be a demand of up to 1500. We're getting 1350 happiness from our arches, which leaves a deficit of 150. That's why we leave this butcher in this 4x4 pocket. Even if you have the resources to upgrade this to a tailor, just leave the butcher so that you can delete and manipulate your happiness as needed. Because it's mostly balanced now, but we're still not perfectly on point. Back to the housing thing though. Up until this point, we've been steadily increasing the supply production, but losing parity on coins every collection, right? And you start out with extra coins, so you have kind of a buffer there, but we're at the point where we need to actually catch up on coin production as well now. So plant the extra tile houses, delete butcher, plant, amphitheater, delete a tile house because we have extra population, make those changes as necessary at this point. Now that we've planted the archer camp, you should be able to auto battle pretty comfortably at this point. So this is it for that collection. On the next collection, you're going to get a shit ton of resources, but really nothing to spend them on now that we have these 2 arches and basically all of our tailors are in place. So at this point, I delete that butcher, and that bottom left butcher is like a permanent placeholder for goods or military camps. Now we're going to plant our ballistas. This is the first time that we've planted a ballista camp. I don't rush this one. I just let it cook because basically this entire collection is disposable this round. So I let it cook. I print 2 or 3 repetitions of ballista, whatever I feel like I need for the map. Delete the ballista, move my archer. That's what's nice here, is that I don't have to plant and wait for the archer. It's already been built, so I just move it back to the road. Run a few repetitions of archers, whatever I need to sustain the map, and then from here I plant a goods building and let that cook in anticipation of the next round. And this is my final stage. At the next collection, I've already printed all my troops. I have 2 arches, but I'm still kind of fiddle fucking with happiness, right? After the next collection, I run my goods building that I don't have to rush because it's already been cooked, right? And print this last expansion. And that's the one that we talked about up here that becomes, eventually, instead of the butcher, this becomes a farm and arch number 3. And at this point, we're ahead enough on happiness that you don't have to manipulate the happiness every single round. This pair right here will become arch number 2. And the nice thing with this third arch is that we don't have to manipulate happiness every collection, like I said. So now at this point, as long as you're maintaining the happiness as you're increasing buildings, it's pretty sustainable. So I alternate between ballista, goods camp, butcher, whatever. Just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And as you expand, I'll expand. I try to do it mostly on the left side, but it really depends on where the obstacles are. I like the left side just because these roads do terminate over here without the archer in the way. You can run that road all the way through to the left side. Vertically, these expansions are kind of hard for me to work with my layout, but I don't necessarily need to plant production buildings in them. Over time, these actually just become more arches and then the victory towers and stuff over time, right? So this is kind of the end game here, where we've accomplished the 6 or 7 basic expansions that we're really after. And at that point, the expansions that I'm planning are just path of least resistance. It's whatever doesn't have an obstacle in it, just to plant more towers and arches for the attack and happiness benefit, right? So that's how I've been doing it. Works out really well. I usually end up with 11 expansions. I use shards for 2 of those. 3 worst case scenario if I don't have the extra goods at start. So worst case scenario, I buy 3 expansions with shards. But the other 8 or 9 are coming from goods cycles that are interchanged with running ballista. Run a few repetition of ballista, plant a goods building, in anticipation of the next collection, when I'll have enough resources to plan another expansion, increase my overall city output even more. So on the subsequent collection after that, I have enough to plant the ballista again, run a couple more cycles, and then, yeah, rinse and repeat. So that's how I've been doing it. I usually end up with 500,000 of each resource per collection towards the end. 11 expansions, 7 arches, 3 farms, 12 or 13 villas. I think last season I had a surplus of 500 goods just stockpiled, and my 12th expansion was only, I think it was 420 or whatever for the 12th expansion for goods. I don't remember for sure, but I had like 500 goods stockpiled that I was either going to donate or buy the expansion with. I had 500 archers, 200 ballista, 200 legionnaire, something like that. So just a stupid amount of resources. The main difference between me and Bob's strategy is that Bob is systematically upgrading his buildings to the more efficient building. And that kind of comes back to what I mentioned early on. Yes, the villa is more efficient per tile on output. It's also very expensive to buy. And the assumption there is that you have a limited amount of tiles to work with, which is only true if you're spending all of your resources on buying the villa. The other option is to spend your resources on buying space. And then the tile efficiency changes pretty substantially from that perspective, right? Anyways, that's how I've been doing it. I like it. It works. Here's what I'm going to do differently, though. This is the punchline, and I'm not going to give this to you guys in Cliff Notes. You've got to watch it or fucking figure it out yourself. I don't really care. But there are variables in here, and you need to understand that before you can copy and paste something. But here's my new system going forward. I've been planning those 2 tailors. We talked about that, right? I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to stick with Bob's stupid, inefficient, dumb, stupid design. Okay. So, butcher, tile house. No upgraded houses at the beginning. No tailors, no upgraded houses, nothing. I get 150k coin to start, minimum. Everyone gets this. If you get more from your ascended stuff, that's cool. But everyone gets this at a minimum. This layout costs about 40k in coin to build and 0 supplies. And I will build the stupidest, most pathetic QI setup on opening day. My happiness is on point. I have 4 houses, a couple butchers. That's it. That's all. Don't even need the 3rd expansion at this point. And then on the first collection, instead of trying to upgrade cottages and upgrade butchers to tailors, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to delete all 3 of these amphitheater, and I'm going to plant 1 arch. And that is guaranteed. There's no way to not accomplish that. If you start off with 150, you spend 40, we have 110 surplus, plus whatever we collect on the next round. We started off with 25 in supplies, spent 0, and we're going to collect 80 on the next collection. is 100K supplies. And we're going to plant an arch. And the space that I've saved from deleting those amphitheaters will just be another fucking plain Jane pair of 2 butchers and 1 house. Okay? My strategy has always been to use resources to gain expansions, but let's break this down real quick. If we use our first collection in order to plant and rush a goods building in order to buy expansion number 4, why don't we just use those resources to plant an arch that we don't even have to rush because it'll cook at the same time that we're ready to collect the next round, which actually frees up 3 expansions. Plus gives us the head start on this never-ending cycle of delete, rebuild, etc., etc. Does that make sense? If you have enough ascended boost to plant 1 or even 2 arches at the very beginning, I would prioritize that over a farm or tailor or anything like that. Just roll with the tile houses and the butchers, knowing that your happiness, you won't have to adjust that until like phase 5 or whatever, when I'm starting to plant my 3rd arch. Does that make sense? That's the way I'm gonna do it going forward. That's the big reveal here. And sorry I couldn't give you a spreadsheet, but there is some variables and you got to understand it before you can actually execute it.